Well, I was born here in Dayton, Ohio, so therefore I'm a native Daytonian. As far as my childhood remembrance, I don't remember too much until about age 5. I, however, was told, and there was pictures, my first year was spent on my grandmother's farm. She had converted a garage into a living space, a one-bedroom apartment for my parents. And so I was told that my first year was here in Montgomery County on my Hungarian grandmother's farm of 36 acres. From there, my parents were looking for a farm of their own. So they found a farm, a small farm, out in Preble County. And my journey, as far as what I recall, began at age 5. My mother often spoke of my being very compassionate. And I stood on a street corner and watched an elderly lady struggle as she was trying to cross the street, and it brought tears to my person. My parents, my father was first generation American. His parents came from Hungary. My mother was South Carolinian. She was born in Gaffney, South Carolina, which is on the border of North and South Carolina. Today it's known as the peach capital of South Carolina. They met during World War II. My father had tried to join the military service, but he was told he was too short. He was 5'2". However, it was a short time after that he was drafted, and he was in the 82nd Airborne and the 101st Airborne. Later, he transferred and was given orders into the 33rd Photo Reconnaissance. And he participated in Europe. He was in England, France, Germany, and Belgium. He was also part of a group that went into Buchenwald concentration camp. It was a horrifying experience. He never spoke about his wartime experience. He did take pictures. Those pictures we have as part of his service. Again, my father didn't speak a lot about his military experience. When he got out of the military, he reconnected with working at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where he had worked prior to going into the service. I was born in the late 40s, and of course, my brother and sister shortly were born. We're close in age. I think there's 32 months between the three of us. So from age 5, I was very ill and had many childhood diseases. German measles, I had pneumonia several times, whooping cough, even though I was vaccinated. It played on my sort of fear, what was going to happen. I actually had my tonsils removed twice, once when I was, I guess, 3, but the second time I remember very vividly. I was 8 years old, and the scar tissue was impacting my hearing. I lost my hearing. My mother knew something was wrong. She took me to an ear, nose, throat specialist, and he said, well, you still have part of your tonsils in, and scar tissue is affecting your son's ears, his hearing. So I had a second operation. However, when I returned home, I was hemorrhaging from my throat, and it was sheer terror. I was rushed back to the hospital. Of course, they can't put a tourniquet around your neck. So they had to give me shots, 6 shots at a timing interval in order to allow the flow of blood to stop. I became this rag doll. I will never forget the feeling, just simply going limp. I recovered, and then my journey began as far as school. I love school. My parents were very supportive of education, even though they both had not graduated from high school. My father had to stop high school when he was a junior in order to take care of his mother's farm and his siblings. My mother, she was the last of 7 children, and part of their family needs was, of course, providing some part of the financial stability. So her parents had a boarding house which had room accommodations for about 25 people. And my mother was sort of helping with the chores or the cleanup or feeding those who lived in those dwellings. Well, coming back as far as my childhood education, my first grade teacher was a wonderful teacher. All my teachers were extraordinarily kind and present. My 5th grade teacher, actually, when I was in school, and I went to a small country school, there were about 400 students in grades 1 through 12. And as a result, our graduating classes were somewhere 30 to 40 students. My 5th grade teacher, as I was speaking about a little earlier in this conversation, actually selected myself for her class, my brother and sister, because somehow we were thought of as these Brady children. We just love studying, and participating in the education. And that goes back to my parents, who always spoke about the need for education. And they never said, as far as, do you stop learning, that life was one in which it was a continuing classroom of learning. They were both deeply involved in our church. My father was a deacon in our church. Both of them spoke to classes. They were Sunday school teachers. My mother was very active in the women's activities, as far as when we had fellowship meals, when there was collections for people who were ill or had died. She was out collecting monies for flowers and for financial support of the families. So we grew up in a rich family of inclusiveness. I was very fortunate as far as my academics. I also was given the opportunity, so to speak, in the 8th grade to begin my journey as far as science projects. I was fortunate that as a freshman in the 9th grade, I had a science project on crystals called crystallography, in which I investigated growing crystals and all the symmetric aspects of the various crystals. That science project, I was awarded superior awards from the school, from the county, from the district, from the regional to the state, in which I was the freshman and only student from our school to receive this superior award, which was given to me at the University of Toledo here in Ohio. I must admit, however, I love basketball, and one of the disappointments in my journey, I went out for the 7th and 8th grade basketball team, and I was the last one to get cut from the team. It was a hurtful time. I was broken, tearful. The coach saw my state of emotions, and here again reached out and asked me to be the statistician, the person who sits on the bench along with the coach, and he plots where the shots are missed and where they're made, trying to give a pattern so the coach during the quarters or halftime can better advise the players. And as a result, I guess I found my niche. I was the statistician from the 7th grade to my senior year. I've been deeply embraced by others. I think I have this naive notion about the world sometimes. Call it innocence, childlike wonder. I'm intrigued with life and living. Another area of interest or excitement, I love dancing. So I wasn't one of the boys or guys who held up the wall. I participated in dancing. So I enjoyed that aspect. I'm amazed that I'm still doing it. Well, it's good for the soul. My life has been so full of detail. Some of which I remember, some of which I remember quite a bit of my life. The thing that I have difficulty with is talking about achievements. I was the president of our science club. In junior high, I played a clarinet and a saxophone. Later, when I was in high school, my brother bought a guitar. I got a bass guitar. We always wanted to be a rock and roll group. We didn't really achieve that, but it was a strong desire. Loved music, classical to rock to folk, and that certainly gave me the space to better use my time. When we were growing up, we weren't involved in a lot of drugs, but there was drinking and there was smoking. I, for whatever reasons, did not choose to go that route at all. And I think it's one of my fear, the fear of death. And those things were so profoundly identified with health issues and early death. So I stayed away from that. I did indeed have lots of friends. In fact, the unique thing about myself and my brother and sister, people never identified us as having any sort of clique association. We were embraced and included, from those that were nerds to those who were the jocks, which we, as children growing up, didn't know there was such a thing as cliques. I mean, it didn't map into our minds. It was only later when there was some reunions that these people, sort of classmates, were in wonderment of how we floated between these groups and yet weren't identified with any group. And I attribute that to my parents again. If there was prejudice of any sort, I didn't feel that it was present. After graduating with honors from my high school, my mother was the person who encouraged me to go to college. I'll be honest, my senior year was very difficult. It was difficult because our small country school was consolidated with another school. And that other school was our hated rival, which was extremely difficult for many of my fellow classmates. In some ways, it wasn't as terribly bad for myself because our church was in the little village in which this rival school resided. So I knew some of the new class members because they'd gone to our church. So there wasn't as much of a harsh time in making that transition. We did have to come together. We had to work on the name of our mascot, the colors, and that was given to us as seniors, since we were to be the first graduating class from this consolidated school system. So I guess that began some of my negotiating skills, and I've been known to be a peacemaker. I don't like conflict. I truly struggle with that aspect. I will speak out because I have what I believe to be a standard, and I have values that I will not compromise on. Again, they come from my parents who were bonded together. Just my cousins would marvel at how well they weren't perfect parents, but they were indeed embracing of their children. Both of them spoke about how they had prayed for their children and how they acknowledged that life was precious. And that, again, has been one of those foundational aspects of my life. Life is profoundly sacred to me. I did attend college here in the Dayton area at what was a new college. It was created by Miami University here in Ohio State. It was the branch campus of those two universities. It later became Wright State University. I'll have to say that my initial journey into college was not as academically successful as I would have wanted. I had never been away from home. That was a commuter college, but it was an hour and some distance. I didn't like driving. I didn't really want to drive. I did not have a car. However, my father worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and Wright State is not too far from. But he would leave in the morning at 5. So I would have to get up at 4. I had to wait until he had completed his job. And of course, this put tremendous stresses as to time management. I had tested well. In fact, they said I'd be a great engineer. However, I didn't feel that was my calling. I knew also that I would have to work my way through college. My parents, I stayed there at home on the farm, still helping them, but I wasn't paid for helping them. I was very fortunate that I obtained a job as a lab technician. I was good in chemistry, and so I was given a job as a lab technician doing chemical titrations for welding fluxes. And there was a small welding company in our small village that was internationally known and was a rival of Hobart at that time, which was a well-known manufacturer of welding equipment and welding fluxes. And I enjoyed a great job. In fact, the lead chemist wanted to hire me once I completed my degree. Well, I took time off because they didn't have enough money for the fall quarter. And it was at that time, having registered for the draft, that I got my draft notice to go for a physical. I went to Cincinnati on a bus with 33 others. And I won the jackpot because only 3 of us apparently passed our physical, and I was one of the 3. The draft board came back and asked, was I going to go back to college? Well, I still had not the funds to return. And I cannot lie. So I spoke the truth and said no. Within a month's time, they had sent me my lottery winning number. I was drafted. Well, part of the story here is while I was in college, I was also in Air Force ROTC, Reserve Officers Training Corps at Miami University. I have pictures of this me in this Air Force uniform. Anyway, it's because I was intending to fulfill what I thought was an obligation to this country, to support the country. My father had done that, and I felt a commitment to give back. And at that time, I thought Air Force was where I needed to be. Well, having received my draft notice, it said Army. It did not say Air Force. I said, well, since I was in Air Force ROTC, maybe the Air Force can get me out of the Army. So I went downtown Dayton to the Air Force recruiter. He looked at my credentials, my background, my education. He said, wow, you're a great candidate, but we don't have any sort of position for you until 2 weeks after you're supposed to be in the Army. You'll be absent from the Army, and that's a crime. Oh my gosh, I said, I'm a criminal. So I kind of kid or joke around. I said, well, I'm a draft dodger because I dropped my head, marched next door into the Marine Corps recruiting, and felt this was during the Vietnam time, that if I was going to go to Vietnam, a draftee probably would not be as well prepared as a trained Marine. Again, whether that was a message from on high, I was blessed because when I went into the Marine Corps, and I'm what they call a Hollywood Marine, I was full of fear, uncertainty, even if they would train you to face Vietnam combat. I still had a great deal of fear because the boot camp itself was, what I had heard, extremely difficult. I did well in boot camp. In fact, the drill instructor, one of which, his name is Sergeant Connors, sort of picked me out, wanted to break me. I was already psychologically saying, no one's going to break me. No one. No human. No one. In fact, I started counting the days that I would come back home. 1,095 days was etched in my mind. I wanted to come home to my parents and to our small farm. In the Marines, it's a 12-week basic training, at least, when I was in the Marine Corps. Then you go on to 5 weeks of advanced infantry training. At the 7th week of the 12th week, you get your military occupation specialty, what you're going to be assigned as a job. Well, the fear is being what they call an infantryman, a grunt. I just was shaking my head when the DI read my name, Private Kansas 4071. He rolled his eyes, looked at me, and used some very colorful language, like he was deeply disappointed that I wasn't going to be an infantryman and wasn't going to be a tunnel rat, the crawl around in the tunnels in Vietnam. He did not know what a 4071 was. I didn't either. And I was thinking, it's not an infantryman, so there must be some peace or space of relief here for me. Well, I quickly penned a letter to my mother to see if she could find out. She went down to the recruiting office here in Dayton and wrote back and sent this booklet, and I was in computers. I was a database analyst. Breathing a sigh of relief, having gone through 12 weeks of training, now I was faced with 5 weeks of advanced infantry training. There's a side story in the 12 weeks. And when I went into the Marine Corps, I weighed 120 pounds. The Marines wanted to put a little more weight on me, so in the chow line, before we entered, there was a sign that says, "Take all you want, eat all you take." And it didn't bother me until these DIs stepped up and put double, triple helpings on my tray. And I was, whoa. I said, really? So I did clean my tray. I gained a whopping 2 pounds. That's it. I'm sorry. Like, that's all this button, burning all this food. And then I went to advanced infantry training, which is more rigorous. I lost 11. I got pneumonia. I refused to go to sickbay because if your training is interrupted, you repeat. You go back to the beginning. You don't pick up where you left off. I vowed there was no way that I was going back through this. Very, very difficult. The physical aspect wasn't as difficult as the psychological. The Marines train you so you are obeying an order, that you're able to assault a bunker and not think about death. You're a killing machine. And I was always conflicted with that. But I wasn't going to go back to day one on any of my training. I had enlisted for 3 years active duty and 3 years in what was called the Ready Reserves. I was very fortunate during that particular time of Vietnam. I did get orders to go to Vietnam. My middle initial, A, was mistyped. They took the orders back. They didn't retype the orders, and yet Vietnam was removed from my orders. They made a hand correction. I went to Okinawa, and my task was the person in charge of all the Western Pacific computer systems as a Sergeant E5. That included Vietnam and Hawaii, all the Marine Corps activities in the Western Pacific. Here I was looking around, and it said, I'm an E5 sergeant, and I'm in charge of all of this. software, and a daunting task. And the only reason I went even overseas is the staff sergeant in E6 who was in charge. He was a native Canadian. He had received a message that his mother was gravely ill in Canada. So he was given humanitarian leave to go back to Canada. He never came back. He was so disappointed in what he had witnessed as a Marine during his, and I think he had been in 7 or 8 years, and the Vietnam War and the death of his mother. He never came back. So it was an emergency deployment, and I got picked to replace him again. I wasn't injured in any way, shape, or form during my military service. Emotionally, I was. I buried 2 Marines on a funeral detail. The first one was very difficult. It was in the middle of Missouri. We arrived and we were told that the coffin contained body parts of a 19-year-old. The coffin was closed. The family was not informed. We sat in the church, stone-faced, sober in our manner, very difficult. I speak with a little more, less emotion. That was a riveting experience for myself. I was 20 when I joined. So I was a little older than many of the Marines. In fact, many of them had not graduated from high school, some of which were on what they called the J&J program, join or jail. They had done some sort of crime, and the judge who was overseeing their case gave them this opportunity, rather than go to jail, to join the military forces. I worked in private industry for a real estate tax accounting firm in computers for about 3 years. And the opportunity came to work at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I was initially hired as a computer specialist, and that involved working with research scientists on their research project, a whole variety of science-based applications in the laboratory. And for my work at the base, I was awarded the 3rd highest civilian award the Air Force can give to a civilian. Flashback, when I was in the Marines, after I'd been out a year, I get a call from the local Marine Reserve unit, and they said, Sergeant Kansas, even though I was a civilian, they were still calling me Sergeant Kansas. The Commandant and the Secretary of the Navy have awarded you the Navy Achievement Medal for your work in the Marines. I'm looking around, what? I just did my job, and I got out. I still got all my body parts. And I was humbled and yet somewhat annoyed. I felt, okay. And I have pictures of the event. My parents were very proud, and I did smile when I got the award. But I also realized when I got out of the service, not only had I been on 2 funeral details, 2 of my Marine Corps friends were killed. 3 of my high school friends were killed. My best Marine friend, his body hasn't been found to this day. One of my high school friends, he was in the Air Force. He had graduated from Ohio State. He was a navigator on a bomber, F-4 Phantom. His body was not recovered for 18 years. All of that started to move forward. I mean, I had psychologically blocked out, even though I saw no combat. When I did come back from Okinawa, I was on a plane with all combat Marines. And it was dead silence. I've faced in my own head survivor's guilt, having not set foot, and yet also the guilt of perhaps not measuring up as a Marine. Not only did I have survivor's guilt because of the fact my orders were changed and I did not go to Vietnam, my mental image of what a Marine is focused on combat. And here I was pulled from the jaws of being a combat Marine. I was a computer Marine. So I have this story now, and I'm working at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and we have lunch together. And there's this conversation, oh, did you serve? And I'm a quiet person. I really don't talk about myself. I observe. I like listening to people's stories. And when I worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, we would have these luncheons, and we'd have new people join us. Inevitably, they'd start talking about their service. And when they would come to me, I'm very reluctant to speak about my service. And when I did, and they said they would try and guess which service I served in, they would very seldom guess the Marines, period. And then when I said what I did as far as occupation specialty, I said I was in computers, they would shake their heads, and more or less, though they never used the word, you could say, well, he's a wannabe, he's a liar, and whatever, which was hurtful because I don't carry with me all my certificates of authenticity signed by all the people in my life. But I started to have fun with it. I just, okay, let it go, let it go. And hopefully my activities, my behavior would speak in some ways to shore up trust and authenticity. I realize now I've accumulated a lot of stuff, but it's places in a box in my apartment, my place. I have some of the photos I've taken, some of my artwork that I've done. I always feel that we're more than just stuff, even that which we create with our own hand. I was divorced, unfortunately. I look at that as a failure. And there's more behind that as far as In fact, I recently saw my former wife 2 weeks ago. And she works at the Dayton Public Library, and she embraces, we parted on friendly terms, but it's still a serious loss, a grief. I graduated from St. Clair Community College, and in 2007, I was recognized as an outstanding alumni graduate for my community work. And right now, the actual, some artwork and one of my photos and a historical photo are in the U.S. Botanical Garden in Washington, D.C. as one of the 25 featured gardens in the U.S. 2014, I was inducted into the Ohio Veterans Hall of Fame. I don't make any those aren't goals. I'm blessed that people recognize, and they picked up their pen and made notes and went through that effort. I just wanted to be on the basketball team for the 7th grade. I mean, my main goal is to serve. There's so much to do in this short life, and I like doing. I like participating in life, serving. It's just exciting to be alive. And I'm a big fan of community, of all walks, ages, cultural backgrounds, experiences. We have a common connection. It's called human beings. And it's a lifelong learning. Each of us get to sort of hang out and study together, but we get individual tests that are unique to our journey. Keep on plugging and chugging. Life to me is a lifelong learning journey, and that foundational seed was planted again with both words from my parents and observation. My day-to-day connection is there'll always be light and dark. There'll be those times of fear and those times of trust. Somewhere within my own being, I have felt this deep, centered foundation of trust. I get excited when I don't know. I become curious. I've had definite times in my life of sheer fear, terror, panic, and they've ricocheted. They've even at times been part of my physical condition. I have a sensitive body. And of course that brings me close to that fear of death again. But I took up contemplative prayer, meditation, and mindfulness, knowing others can't work on my emotional, psychological. I refuse chemicals, drugs, even though they can help. I don't sit here saying they're not applicable to certain people. I've got this hard-headed place, but I also have this playful child who, excuse the language, is looking for the pony in the poop. If there's so much poop out there, there must be a herd of ponies. So that gives me sort of a humorous. I have sent myself in sheer terror with my emotions, not understanding them. I work on the most difficult person to work on. That's right here, myself. I'm richly blessed and open to others and their helpful insight, feedback. But I also give them reasonable space because they do not know who dwells here. And that can be terrorizing at times. I've read the Bible. I'm looking for reassurance at times, and sometimes you just have to surrender. You just have to trust beyond knowing. For me, I've said there is that which I will know, that which I will not know, and that which I will never know. So therefore, it's a greater level of trust. Yes, I do have days when I don't want to get out of bed or out of the apartment. Who will see me? What looks will I get? What words? Or worse yet, I have success. I think at times I fear success. What do you do when you're successful? What's beyond that? So I gave up keeping score. I don't. I get glimpses of insight to fill in the tapestry, as I call it. I love the metaphors of art. I love the metaphors of gardening. I love listening to humans and their stories. That encourages me. Lessons learned for all. I don't have advice. All I can smile when open. It's a challenge, but to be open and remain vulnerable in trust, faith. I just look at the universe at night and then look at my feet. I just embrace as much of this beautiful creation as I possibly can.